Tonight, we begin a gentle journey into one of the most healing practices the Buddha ever taught. Through ancient stories and teachings, we will explore the path of forgiveness together. These are not lessons to memorize or techniques to master. They are timeless teachings that will naturally settle into your heart, guiding you toward the peace that forgiveness brings. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. If you are carrying the weight of old mistakes, know that you are not alone. If you are holding resentment towards someone who hurt you, that too is part of being human. The Buddha understood that we all carry these burdens. He taught that forgiveness is not a single moment of letting go, but a gradual practice of releasing what weighs us down. Tonight, we will explore both kinds of forgiveness. The forgiveness we extend to ourselves when we cannot stop replaying our own mistakes, and the forgiveness we gradually offer to those who have wronged us, not because they deserve it, but because we deserve peace. As we move through these teachings and stories, you may notice your breathing naturally deepening, your body naturally softening. Understanding brings its own peace. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing else you need to fix tonight. Just rest here as we explore the Buddha's teachings together. The Buddha once taught his students about 2 arrows. He said that when something painful happens to us, it is like being struck by an arrow. This first arrow is the actual event, the mistake we made, the words we said that we wish we could take back, the harm we caused without meaning to. This first arrow hurts. There is no denying that. But the Buddha noticed something important about human suffering. He saw that we almost always shoot ourselves with a second arrow immediately after the first one strikes. This second arrow is our reaction to what happened. The harsh story we tell ourselves. The brutal self-judgment. The way we replay the mistake over and over, each time adding more criticism and shame. The first arrow might be shouting at someone we love in a moment of stress. The second arrow is spending the next 3 days telling ourselves we are a terrible person who always ruins relationships. The first arrow is making an error at work. The second arrow is the voice that says we are incompetent and will never succeed at anything. Here is what the Buddha understood. The first arrow is often beyond our control. Life brings pain. We make mistakes because we are human and still learning. But the second arrow, that one we shoot ourselves, and that second arrow often causes far more suffering than the first one ever could. Tonight, as we explore forgiveness, we begin here, with learning to put down the second arrow, with noticing the difference between what actually happened and the story we tell ourselves about what it means. This is where forgiveness of ourselves begins. Not by denying the first arrow or pretending we did nothing wrong, but by stopping the attack, by choosing not to add violence to pain. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching in a way that might settle into your bones more deeply than words alone can reach. In a monastery tucked into the mountains, there lived a young monk named Tenzo. He had been at the monastery for only 6 months, and he was eager to prove himself worthy of being there. Every task he was given, he approached with intense focus and care. He wanted the senior monks to see that he was serious about his practice. One morning, the abbot called Tenzo to his room. The abbot was a man in his 70s, with kind eyes and gnarled hands that showed decades of work. He gestured for Tenzo to sit. "I have a special task for you today," the abbot said. He walked to a shelf and carefully lifted down a tea bowl. It was clearly very old, with a deep brown glaze that seemed to hold light within it. This bowl belonged to my teacher and to his teacher before him. It has been part of our tea ceremonies for over 100 years. Tenzo's eyes widened. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. "Today we have an important visitor coming," the abbot continued. "I would like you to prepare tea using this bowl. Wash it carefully, warm it, and have everything ready for this afternoon." Tenzo bowed deeply and accepted the bowl with both hands. He could feel his heart beating faster. This was an honor, but also a test. He would not fail. He carried the bowl to the kitchen as if it were made of spider silk. He prepared a basin of warm water, selected the softest cloth he could find, and began the careful process of washing the precious bowl. As he worked, his mind was full of thoughts. He imagined the abbot praising his careful attention. He pictured the important visitor being impressed by the tea ceremony. He rehearsed every step he would need to take that afternoon. He was so lost in these thoughts that he did not notice his hand slipping. The bowl tilted in his wet grip. He tried to catch it, but only knocked it harder. The ancient tea bowl fell from his hands and shattered on the stone floor. For a moment, Tenzo could not breathe. He stared at the broken pieces. Over 100 years of history, destroyed in a single careless moment. The abbot's treasured bowl from his beloved teacher, now just shards of pottery scattered across the floor. His first thought was to hide it. Maybe he could say he never received the bowl. Maybe he could claim someone else had broken it. His mind raced through desperate possibilities. But he was a monk, training in honesty and integrity. He could not lie. He would have to confess what he had done. As he knelt there among the broken pieces, the second arrow struck. His mind began its attack. How could you be so careless? You are not worthy to be here. The abbot trusted you with something precious and you destroyed it. You always mess everything up. They will send you away and you will deserve it. The voice in his head was vicious. It did not simply acknowledge that he had made a mistake. It told him that the mistake proved he was fundamentally flawed. That this one moment of clumsiness revealed his true nature as someone who ruins beautiful things. Tenzo gathered the pieces with shaking hands and carried them to the abbot's room. He knelt outside the door, feeling sick with dread. When the abbot called for him to enter, Tenzo could barely speak. "Master," he said, his voice breaking, "I have done something terrible." He placed the broken pieces on the floor in front of the abbot and lowered his head. Tears ran down his face. He waited for the anger, the disappointment, the order to leave the monastery. The abbot looked at the broken bowl for a long moment. Then he looked at Tenzo's face, seeing the anguish there. "Tell me what happened," the abbot said quietly. Through his tears, Tenzo explained. The washing, the distraction, the slip. He did not make excuses. He simply told the truth. When he finished, the abbot nodded slowly. He picked up one of the larger pieces and turned it over in his weathered hands. "This bowl has been part of our monastery for many years," the abbot said. "It survived a fire 40 years ago. It made it through an earthquake when I was a young monk. It has been used in thousands of tea ceremonies." Tenzo's heart sank further. He had destroyed something irreplaceable. But the abbot's next words surprised him. All that time, it was waiting to break. Every object that exists will eventually break, burn, or crumble to dust. This bowl's nature was always impermanence, even when it appeared whole and strong. You did not change its nature. You simply witnessed the moment when that nature revealed itself. The abbot set down the piece he was holding and looked directly at Tenzo. "Tell me, are you suffering right now?" Tenzo nodded, unable to speak. "What is causing your suffering? Is it the broken bowl, or is it the story you are telling yourself about what this means?" Tenzo thought about this. The bowl was already broken. That fact could not be changed. But his mind had taken that fact and built an entire narrative on top of it. A story about his worthlessness, his clumsiness, his fundamental inadequacy. "The bowl is broken," Tenzo said slowly. "But I am telling myself that I am a terrible person, that I always ruin things, that you will send me away. And has any of that story helped you?" the abbot asked gently. Tenzo shook his head. The bowl broke because conditions came together for it to break. Wet hands, a moment of distraction, the pull of gravity. This is not about your worth as a person or as a monk. This is about a bowl following the nature of all physical things. The abbot stood and placed a hand on Tenzo's shoulder. The first arrow was the bowl breaking. That caused some natural disappointment. I have memories attached to this bowl, and I will miss using it. But the second arrow is the one you are shooting into yourself right now. The harsh judgment. The certainty that this mistake defines you. That second arrow is causing far more pain than the broken bowl ever could. Tenzo felt something shift inside him. The bowl was still broken. He had still made a mistake. But maybe, just maybe, he could acknowledge the mistake without destroying himself over it. "What should I do?" he asked. "Learn from what happened," the abbot said simply. "Pay better attention when handling precious things. But also understand that even with perfect attention, things break. The world is fragile, and so are we. This is not a flaw. This is the nature of existence." He smiled at Tenzo. "Now clean up these pieces carefully. We will use them in the garden path so that this bowl continues to serve the monastery in a new form. And please prepare tea for our visitor this afternoon using one of the everyday bowls. They are just as good for drinking tea." As Tenzo swept up the broken pieces, he felt lighter than he had in the terrible minutes since the bowl had shattered. The mistake had happened. But he was learning to put down the second arrow of self-attack. Take a breath here. Feel how Tenzo's story might reflect something in your own experience. We all know what it feels like to make a mistake and then punish ourselves far beyond what the mistake deserves. The Buddha's teaching of the second arrow helps us see this pattern clearly. When we can notice the difference between what happened and the story we tell about what it means, we create space for forgiveness to begin. We can say, "Yes, I made a mistake," without also saying, "and therefore I am worthless." This is not about making excuses or avoiding responsibility. Tenzo still needed to clean up the broken bowl and learn to be more careful. But he could do those things without the crushing weight of shame and self-hatred. The wisdom here is simple but profound. Pain is part of life. Mistakes are part of being human. But the vicious attack we launch against ourselves after mistakes, that is optional. We can choose to put down that second arrow. Let us explore another story that shows this teaching from a different angle. Sometimes the second arrow looks less like harsh words we say to ourselves and more like the belief that we have ruined something beyond repair. There once lived a calligrapher named Sato who was known throughout her province for the beauty of her brushwork. She had studied the art since childhood and could create characters that seemed to dance across the page with effortless grace. A wealthy family commissioned her to create a scroll for their daughter's wedding. They wanted 4 characters, meaning eternal happiness, written in Sato's most elegant style. They offered generous payment and gave her the finest silk scroll to work on. Sato prepared for this commission with great care. She fasted for 2 days to clear her mind. She practiced the characters hundreds of times on ordinary paper until every stroke felt natural and flowing. She arranged her studio to perfection, with the light coming from the exact right angle. When she finally felt ready, she laid out the precious silk scroll and prepared her ink. She had chosen her favorite brush, one made from wolf hair that held ink beautifully and created lines of varied thickness. The first character flowed from her brush with absolute perfection. She could feel it as she worked. Every stroke was balanced and alive. This was some of her best work. She paused before beginning the second character, taking a slow breath to maintain her focus. As she lifted her brush to start the next stroke, a sharp gust of wind blew through the open window. She had left it open for ventilation, not thinking about the autumn breezes. The wind knocked over her water jar. Water splashed across the scroll, creating a large spreading stain right through the center of her perfect first character. Sato sat frozen, watching the water soak into the expensive silk. Weeks of preparation destroyed in an instant. The commission ruined. Her reputation at stake. All because she had carelessly left the window open. The second arrow struck immediately. How could you be so stupid? A professional calligrapher knows to check these things. You have ruined everything. The family will tell everyone about your carelessness. You are a failure. She stared at the damaged scroll, feeling her chest tighten with panic and self-recrimination. She had no more silk of this quality. The wedding was in 10 days. There was no time to order more materials and start over. She had failed completely. For several minutes, Sato sat paralyzed by these thoughts. The harsh voice in her mind listed every stupid decision she had made. Leaving the window open, not securing the water jar, being overconfident. Each criticism felt like another arrow piercing her. But then, as she continued to stare at the ruined scroll, something shifted in her vision. She began to see the water stain, not as destruction, but as something with its own shape and character. It had spread in an organic pattern, like a cloud formation or a mountain silhouette. The edges were soft and gradual, quite different from the crisp, deliberate lines of calligraphy. An idea began to form. What if she worked with the stain rather than fighting against it? What if this accident could become part of the art rather than its destruction? Sato picked up her brush again, but this time with a different intention. Instead of trying to cover up the water stain or work around it as if it were not there, she began to incorporate it into her design. She let the stain suggest where certain strokes should go. She used its organic shapes as a counterpoint to the structured characters. As she worked, she felt something loosening inside her. The rigid perfectionism that had made her fast and practice and worry began to soften. She stopped trying to control every tiny detail and instead responded to what was actually in front of her. The accident became her partner in creation. Hours later, when she set down her brush, she looked at what she had created with wonder. It was completely different from what she had planned. The water stain wove through the four characters, creating depth and movement. The piece had a spontaneity and life that her carefully controlled work sometimes lacked. The formal perfection she had been aiming for had been replaced by something more interesting. Something that showed both mastery and surrender. Both skill and acceptance of accident. When she delivered the scroll to the family, they were amazed. They said it was unlike anything they had seen before. The bride's mother wept when she saw it, saying it captured something about marriage itself. The way plans and accidents weave together. The way rigid expectations must soften to allow for real beauty. Sato accepted their praise, but she knew the real gift the scroll had given her. It had taught her that the second arrow of harsh self-judgment had almost prevented her from discovering something new. When the water spilled, she could have stayed stuck in self-attack and truly ruined everything. Instead, she had noticed the voice of criticism, felt its pain, and then gently set it aside to see what else might be possible. The mistake had still happened. The original plan had still been disrupted. But these facts did not have to mean failure. They could mean transformation instead. In both of these stories, we see the same teaching unfolding. The first arrow comes. The bowl breaks. The water spills. These things happen in life, and they bring natural disappointment or frustration. This is normal and human. But then comes the choice point. Do we shoot the second arrow? Do we take the pain of what happened and multiply it with harsh judgment and catastrophic stories? Or can we notice that impulse and choose differently? The abbot helped Tenzo see that his worth was not determined by a broken bowl. Sato discovered on her own that a mistake could become an opening rather than a disaster. Both of them practiced putting down the second arrow. This is the foundation of self-forgiveness in Buddhist practice. It begins with noticing when we are attacking ourselves, with seeing clearly that the story we tell about our mistakes is separate from the mistakes themselves. You might have something in your life right now, some mistake or regret that you keep replaying. Notice what happens in your mind when you think about it. Can you distinguish between the actual event and the harsh commentary you add to it? The event is the first arrow. It happened. But the second arrow, the voice that says you are fundamentally flawed or damaged because of it, that arrow is optional. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from clinging and resistance. When we cling to an image of ourselves as perfect and then resist the reality that we make mistakes, we suffer. But when we can accept that mistakes are part of learning, part of being human, part of the fragile nature of existence, we suffer less. This does not mean we ignore the consequences of our actions. Tenzo still had to clean up the broken bowl. Sato still had to figure out what to do about the damaged scroll. Taking responsibility is part of the practice. But responsibility looks different without the second arrow. It becomes about learning and repairing rather than about proving our worthlessness. It becomes about asking, what can I do now, rather than how terrible am I? As you rest here tonight, you might notice thoughts arising about your own mistakes, old regrets, recent slip-ups, words you wish you could take back. This is natural. The mind brings these things up. See if you can notice when the second arrow appears, when the voice of harsh judgment starts to speak. You do not have to fight with this voice or push it away. Simply notice it. There is the second arrow. There is the harsh story I tell about what this mistake means. And then, gently, see if you can put it down. Not because you are pretending the mistake did not happen, but because you understand that attacking yourself does not help anyone. Not you, not the people you may have hurt, not the situation you are trying to improve. The Buddha's wisdom on forgiveness begins here, with this simple but profound shift. From criticism to compassion. From the second arrow to simple acknowledgement of the first. This is how we begin to forgive ourselves. Not all at once, not perfectly, but moment by moment, choosing a gentler way. There is an old saying about resentment. Holding on to anger towards someone who has wronged you is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The bitterness sits in your stomach, not theirs. The replaying of old hurts happens in your mind, not theirs. The sleep you lose belongs to you alone. The Buddha understood something essential about the nature of resentment. He taught that hatred never ceases through hatred. That holding on to grievances creates suffering in the person who holds them, regardless of whether the other person ever knows or cares about your anger. This might seem unfair. Someone wrongs us, and we are the ones who have to do the work of forgiveness. They get to move on with their life, while we struggle with the weight of what they did. But Buddhist wisdom approaches this differently. Forgiveness is not a gift we give to the person who wronged us. It is a gift we give to ourselves. When we forgive, we are not saying that what happened was acceptable. We are not excusing harmful behavior or pretending we were not hurt. We are simply choosing to release the poison of resentment so that we can be free. Tonight we explore this kind of forgiveness. The forgiveness we extend not because someone deserves it, but because we deserve peace. Not because the wrong was small or insignificant, but because carrying it has become too heavy. This teaching can be difficult to accept. Part of us wants the other person to suffer as we have suffered. Part of us believes that letting go of our anger means letting them off the hook. But the Buddha saw clearly that our anger does not punish them. It punishes us. When we hold resentment, we carry the person who hurt us everywhere we go. They live in our thoughts, in our tight shoulders, in our restless nights. We give them space in our hearts and minds long after they have moved on from the encounter. We allow them to continue hurting us through our own unwillingness to let go. Forgiveness offers a different path. Not reconciliation necessarily. Not returning to relationship with someone who caused harm, but an internal release. A decision to stop drinking the poison. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching simply and clearly. Two monks were traveling together along a muddy road after days of heavy rain. The older monk, whose name was Tanzan, had been practicing for 40 years. The younger monk, Aikido, had been ordained for only 3 years and was still learning to manage his mind and emotions. As they walked, they came to a place where the road crossed a swollen stream. The water rushed brown and fast, and the usual stepping stones were completely submerged. Standing at the edge of the stream was a young woman in fine silk robes, clearly from a wealthy family. She looked distressed. In their tradition, monks were not supposed to touch women, especially not young women. The rules were strict about this. Both monks knew this well. Tanzan approached the woman and asked if she needed help. She explained that she had to cross but was afraid of the current and did not want to ruin her expensive clothing. Without hesitation, Tanzan picked her up, carried her across the stream, and set her down gently on the other side. She thanked him and went on her way. The two monks continued walking. Aikido was silent, but his mind was racing. His teacher had broken the rules. Touched a woman. Carried her even. How could an elder monk, someone who was supposed to set an example, violate their precepts so casually? They walked for an hour in silence. Then another. The sun moved across the sky. They passed through a village and out the other side. Still, Aikido said nothing, but his thoughts grew louder and more agitated. Finally, after nearly 4 hours of walking, Aikido could not contain himself any longer. "Master," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "we are not supposed to touch women. Especially not young, beautiful women. Yet you picked that girl up and carried her across the stream. How could you do that?" Tanzan turned to look at his student with mild surprise. "Oh, that girl?" he said calmly. "I set her down on the other side of the stream hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Aikido stopped walking, struck by the truth of these words. Tanzan had helped the woman and then released the encounter completely. It was finished. He had moved on. But Aikido had been carrying the weight of that moment for hours, letting it build and ferment into resentment and judgment. The woman was long gone, probably at home by now, unaware that a young monk was still mentally carrying her. Tanzan had forgotten about the incident entirely. But Aikido had held on to it, turning it over and over in his mind, letting it poison his afternoon and his relationship with his teacher. As they continued walking, Aikido began to see something about the nature of resentment. The event itself had taken maybe 2 minutes. Tanzan lifting the woman, crossing the stream, setting her down. 2 minutes. But Aikido had spent 4 hours replaying those 2 minutes, adding layers of judgment and anger, building a whole story about what it meant. He had been carrying something that Tanzan had set down immediately. The burden was entirely of his own making. This realization did not come all at once. As they walked, Aikido found his mind returning again and again to the stream crossing, wanting to argue with Tanzan's point, wanting to justify his anger. But each time, he could see more clearly that he was the one choosing to carry this. Tanzan had offered him an example of how to help someone and then let it go. Instead, Aikido had picked up the weight and carried it for hours. By evening, when they stopped at a temple for the night, Aikido's resentment had begun to dissolve. Not because Tanzan had apologized or explained himself, but because Aikido had seen the truth of how he was creating his own suffering. Take a slow breath here and feel into this story. How many things are you still carrying that happened hours ago, days ago, years ago? How many 2-minute encounters have you replayed for months, adding weight each time you return to them? The Buddha's teaching on forgiveness shows us that we have a choice in each moment. We can set down what happened, or we can carry it. The person who wronged us is not making us carry it. They have often moved on completely, unaware that we are still holding the weight of what they did. This does not mean we pretend nothing happened. Aikido had genuinely seen something that troubled him. His concern about the rules was real. But he had a choice about how long to carry that concern and how much power to give it over his peace. Forgiveness means setting down what we have been carrying. not because it was not heavy, but because carrying it is hurting us more than it hurts anyone else. Sometimes the weight we carry is much heavier than a broken rule. Sometimes we are carrying real harm, real betrayal, deep wounds that change the course of our lives. For these situations, we need to look at forgiveness from another angle. In a farming village, there lived a man named Jiro who grew rice in the paddies that his family had tended for generations. His fields were fed by a careful system of irrigation channels that brought water from the river through many farms before reaching his land. One summer, his neighbor upstream, a man named Kenji, made a decision that would change everything. Kenji wanted to grow more rice, so he altered the irrigation channels to divert more water to his own fields. He did this without consulting the other farmers, thinking only of his own gain. When the summer heat came, Jiro's fields did not get enough water. His rice plants withered and turned brown. He walked his dry fields in disbelief, then in growing anger as he realized what Kenji had done. An entire year's crop lost. His family's income gone. All because of one man's greed. Jiro confronted Kenji, who did not even apologize. Kenji shrugged and said he had the right to take what water he needed. The law was unclear about water rights, and there was little Jiro could do. The rage that filled Jiro was like nothing he had felt before. At night he lay awake, planning elaborate revenge. He imagined destroying Kenji's fields the way his had been destroyed. He fantasized about confronting Kenji in the village square, shaming him in front of everyone. He spent hours composing speeches about injustice that he would deliver to the village council. During the day, he could barely function. When he should have been planning his next crop, he was consumed with thoughts of what Kenji had taken from him. When he should have been repairing tools and preparing for the next season, he was rehearsing arguments and imagining confrontations. His wife watched him with growing concern. His children learned to stay quiet around him, sensing the storm of anger that filled their father. Months passed, and Jiro remained trapped in his fury. One day, an old friend came to visit from a neighboring village. This friend, a man named Hideo, had known Jiro since childhood. He saw immediately that something was deeply wrong. They sat together in Jiro's house, drinking tea, and Jiro poured out the whole story. The destroyed crop, Kenji's selfishness, the injustice of it all. His voice shook with rage as he spoke. Hideo listened carefully until Jiro had said everything he needed to say. Then he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I am sorry this happened to you," Hideo said. "What Kenji did was wrong. He harmed you and your family, and that harm is real." Jiro nodded, grateful to be understood. "But I need to ask you something," Hideo continued. "Will your anger grow new rice?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Jiro opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. "You have spent months consumed by this," Hideo said gently. "Months that you could have spent planning how to plant differently next season, or how to dig a new well, or how to adapt to the water you have. Instead, you have spent every day tending your anger like it is a crop that will feed your family." Jiro felt defensive. "So I should just accept what he did? Pretend it did not happen?" "No," Hideo said firmly. "You should acknowledge what happened and deal with it practically. Talk to the village council if that might help. Find new sources of water if you can. Plant crops that need less irrigation. Do whatever you can to protect your family going forward. but do all of that without feeding the anger that is eating you alive. He leaned forward and looked directly at Jiro. The anger you feel is natural. Kenji wronged you. But holding on to that anger, replaying it every day, letting it take over your life, that is not hurting Kenji. He is sleeping well at night. He is planning his next crop. Your rage is not touching him at all. It is only destroying you. Jiro wanted to argue, but he could not. He knew Hideo was right. Kenji did seem unbothered by what he had done. Meanwhile, Jiro had become a shell of himself, hollowed out by bitterness. "How do I let it go?" Jiro asked, and there was desperation in his voice. He does not deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about what he deserves, Hideo said quietly. It is about what you deserve. You deserve to sleep at night. Your wife deserves to have her husband back. Your children deserve a father who can laugh again. You deserve to put your energy into building your life rather than rehearsing your grievances. He poured more tea for both of them. Forgiving Kenji does not mean you trust him again. It does not mean you restore the friendship you once had. It does not even mean you have to speak to him. It means you stop giving him power over your inner life. It means you stop letting what he did 6 months ago determine how you feel today. Over the following weeks, Jiro began the difficult work of releasing his resentment. It did not happen all at once. Some days he would feel free of it, and then something would remind him, and the anger would flare up again. But each time, he would remember Hideo's question. Will your anger grow new rice? Slowly, painfully, he began to redirect his energy. He consulted with other farmers about their water sources. He experimented with crops that needed less irrigation. He repaired the relationships with his wife and children that his rage had damaged. He did not forgive Kenji because Kenji apologized. Kenji never did apologize. He forgave because carrying the weight of what Kenji had done was preventing him from moving forward with his own life. The forgiveness was not for Kenji's benefit. It was for his own. A year later, Jiro's fields were producing again. Not as much as before, but enough. He had adapted to the new reality of less water. More importantly, he had his life back. He could laugh with his children again. He could make plans for the future without every thought being colored by bitterness. When people in the village asked him how he had recovered from such a betrayal, he would say simply, I decided that Kenji had already taken 1 year's crop from me. I was not going to let him take the rest of my life as well. These two stories show us different aspects of the same teaching. Aikido was carrying resentment over something small, something that had barely affected him. Jiro was carrying resentment over real harm, over a genuine injustice that had serious consequences for his family. But in both cases, the resentment was hurting the person carrying it more than anyone else. Tanzan had forgotten the stream crossing. Kenji was sleeping well despite his wrongdoing. The person suffering from the resentment was always the one holding it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Forgiveness in the Buddhist sense is the decision to put down the hot coal. Not because the other person deserves it, but because holding it is burning your hand. This teaching can feel unfair. Why should we have to do this work when we were the ones who were wronged? Why does the burden of forgiveness fall on the person who was harmed? The answer is simple, though not easy. because we are the ones suffering from the resentment. Because we are the ones who want to be free. The person who wronged us may never change, may never apologize, may never even realize the harm they caused. We cannot control that. But we can control whether we continue to poison ourselves with bitterness. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Jiro did not need to become friends with Kenji again. He did not need to trust him with anything important. He could maintain appropriate boundaries and protect himself from future harm. But he could do all of that without the corrosive bitterness that was destroying his own peace. This is an important distinction that Buddhist wisdom offers us. We can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in our lives. We can forgive and still maintain boundaries. We can forgive and still seek justice or protection. Forgiveness is an internal release, not an external reconciliation. When we forgive, we are not saying that what happened was okay. We are saying that we are no longer willing to carry the weight of it. We are choosing our own freedom over our desire for the other person to suffer. Take another slow breath and notice what arises as you consider this teaching. Is there someone you have been carrying? Some old hurt that you replay in your mind, even though the person who caused it has long since moved on? You do not need to forgive them tonight. You do not need to forgive them at all if you are not ready. But you might consider asking yourself Hideo's question. Is carrying this resentment growing anything good in your life? Or is it simply taking up space where peace could be? The Buddha taught that we each have a garden inside us. We can plant seeds of bitterness and water them with our attention until they take over the whole garden. Or we can notice those bitter plants and gently remove them, making space for something else to grow. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not letting someone off the hook. It is the recognition that holding on to resentment gives the person who wronged us continued power over our inner life. It is the decision to reclaim that power for ourselves. As you rest here tonight, you might notice resentments arising, old hurts presenting themselves. This is natural. The mind brings up what it has been carrying. You do not need to push these feelings away or pretend they are not there. But you might also ask yourself gently whether you are ready to set any of them down. Not because the person who hurt you deserves forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because carrying it has become too heavy. The path of forgiveness is gradual. It is a practice, not a single moment. Some days we will pick up old resentments again after we thought we had released them. This is normal. We simply notice and gently set them down once more. The Buddha's wisdom offers us this possibility. That we can release the poison we have been drinking. That we can set down what we have been carrying. That we can reclaim the energy we have been spending on old grievances and use it to build something new. This is the gift we give ourselves when we forgive. Not because anyone deserves it, but because we deserve to be free. Everyone carries regrets. Some are small, the wish that we had said something differently or made a different choice in a moment that passed quickly. But some regrets are heavy. They are the mistakes that changed the course of our lives or the lives of others. The decisions we made that we cannot undo. The harm we caused that we cannot repair. These deeper regrets can follow us for years. They surface in quiet moments. They color how we see ourselves. They create a shadow that makes it hard to believe we deserve peace or happiness. We look back at who we were when we made those mistakes, and we struggle to forgive that person even though that person is us. The Buddha taught extensively about regret and guilt. He made an important distinction that can help us understand how to work with these difficult feelings. He taught that guilt can be useful if it leads to learning and change. When we feel remorse about harm we have caused, that feeling can motivate us to behave differently in the future. It can wake us up to the consequences of our actions and inspire us to grow. But guilt that does not lead anywhere, guilt that simply replays the past over and over without any possibility of learning or change, that kind of guilt is what Buddhists call useless suffering. It does not help us. It does not help the people we harmed. It simply keeps us trapped in a cycle of shame. The difference is crucial. One kind of guilt says, "I did something harmful, and I need to learn from this, so I do not repeat it." The other kind says, "I am a bad person, and this mistake proves my fundamental unworthiness." One opens a path forward. The other closes all paths and leaves us stuck. When we work with deep regrets, we are working with this second kind of guilt, the kind that has become shame. We are not trying to pretend we did nothing wrong or that our mistakes do not matter. We are trying to find a way to acknowledge what we did, take responsibility for it, and still find a path toward healing and growth. The Buddha was clear that everyone has the capacity to change. No matter what we have done, no matter how far we have strayed from our values, we can choose differently starting now. The past is fixed. We cannot change what happened. But the future is still open. Who we become next is still up to us. This is where self-forgiveness for deep regrets begins. Not with denying what we did or making excuses for it, but with asking a different question. Instead of asking, "How could I have done that?" we begin to ask, "What can I do now?" Instead of endlessly reviewing the past, we begin to face the present and future. This shift is not easy, especially when the mistakes we are working with are serious. It can feel wrong to forgive ourselves. It can feel like we are letting ourselves off the hook or dishonoring the people we hurt. But continuing to punish ourselves does not honor anyone. It does not repair the harm. It does not make us better people. It simply keeps us locked in a past we cannot change. Let us explore a story about someone wrestling with this very struggle. In a small village, there lived a young man named Haru who was apprenticed to a master potter. Haru had been studying with the potter for 2 years, learning the careful art of shaping clay on the wheel, mixing glazes, and firing pieces in the large kiln. The master potter, an elderly woman named Chiyo, had spent months preparing for a special commission. A wealthy patron had ordered a complete tea set, 12 pieces that would be used in an important ceremony. Chiyo had selected the finest clay, developed a special glaze, and worked on these pieces for weeks. The pieces were beautiful. The cups were perfectly balanced, the teapot poured without dripping, and the glaze had a depth that seemed to glow from within. Chiyo had put them in the kiln for their final firing and asked Haru to watch the temperature carefully while she rested. Haru knew this job was important. He had fired pieces before and understood the process. The temperature had to be maintained at a precise level for many hours. If it dropped too much, the glaze would not set properly. If it got too hot, the pieces could crack or even melt. For the first few hours, Haru was attentive. He added fuel to the fire at the right intervals and checked the temperature regularly. But as the afternoon wore on, he became distracted. A friend from the village stopped by to talk. Then another. Soon Haru was caught up in conversation, laughing and joking while the kiln temperature slowly rose beyond the safe range. By the time he remembered to check, it was too late. The tea set was ruined. The glaze had bubbled and run. Some pieces had cracked. Months of his master's work destroyed because he had not paid attention. Haru stared into the kiln in horror as the reality of what he had done became clear. His master's reputation depended on delivering this commission on time. The patron was powerful and could spread word throughout the region if he was disappointed. And beyond the practical concerns, there was the fact that Chiyo had put her heart into these pieces. They were some of her finest work. When Chiyo came to check on the firing and saw what had happened, her face went pale. She looked at the ruined pieces for a long time without speaking. Haru felt his stomach twist with shame and dread. Finally, Chiyo turned to him and asked simply, "What happened?" Haru could have lied. He could have said the kiln malfunctioned or that he had been called away for an emergency. But he found he could not add dishonesty to his failure. He told her the truth. He had been distracted. He had not paid attention. He had destroyed her work through his carelessness. Chiyo was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Go home. I need time to think about this." Haru left the workshop feeling like his life was ending. He had failed his master. He had proven himself unworthy of her teaching. She would certainly send him away, and his reputation as a careless apprentice would follow him wherever he went. That night, Haru could not sleep. He replayed the afternoon over and over in his mind. If only he had told his friends to leave. If only he had checked the temperature more frequently. If only he had been the careful, dedicated apprentice his master deserved. The weight of his mistake pressed on him until he thought he might stop breathing from the shame of it. The next morning, Chiyo sent word for him to come to the workshop. Haru walked there slowly, dreading what she would say. He found her sitting at her work table with the ruined pieces spread out in front of her. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly. Haru sat, keeping his eyes down. "Look at these pieces," Chiyo said, pushing them toward him. Haru forced himself to look at the ruined tea set. The bubbled glaze. The cracks. The distorted shapes where the clay had softened from too much heat. "Tell me what you see," Chiyo said. "I see my failure," Haru said quietly. "I see months of your work destroyed because I was not careful enough." "Look again," Chiyo said. "What else do you see?" Haru did not understand what she wanted, but he looked more carefully. After a moment, he noticed something. The way the glaze had run created interesting patterns. The cracks had their own strange beauty. The pieces were no longer what they were meant to be, but they had become something else. "I see that they are broken," Haru said, "but not completely destroyed. They have a different kind of beauty now." Chiyo nodded. "These pieces will never be the tea set I intended to make." "That is true. Your mistake cannot be undone. But they are not worthless. They are now teaching pieces. They will help me understand what happens at different temperatures. And they will teach you something far more valuable than technique." She picked up one of the cracked cups and turned it in her hands. "In pottery, we have a practice of repairing broken pieces with gold mixed into the lacquer. It is called kintsugi. The repair becomes part of the piece's beauty. The broken places are not hidden, but highlighted. The piece becomes more valuable because of its history, not in spite of it. She set down the cup and looked at Haru directly. You made a serious mistake. You were careless with something important, and there are real consequences. I will have to tell the patron that the tea set will be delayed. I will have to start over. This is not nothing. But the question now is not whether you made a mistake. The question is what this mistake will teach you. Haru felt tears building behind his eyes. I have learned to pay attention, he said. I will never be so careless again. Yes, Chiyo agreed. But there is something deeper to learn. You have learned what it feels like to fail at something important. You have felt the weight of letting someone down. This experience, painful as it is, will make you a better potter and a better person if you let it. It will make you more careful, yes, but it will also make you more humble, more compassionate when others make mistakes, more grateful when things go right. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. I have been a potter for 50 years. Do you know how many pieces I have ruined in that time? Do you think I became a master without making terrible mistakes? The difference between a master and an apprentice is not that the master never fails. It is that the master has learned how to fail and keep going. Over the following weeks, Chiyo taught Haru how to work with the ruined pieces. They ground some down to add to new clay. They used others as teaching examples. And together, they practiced kintsugi on the cracked pieces, filling the breaks with lacquer mixed with gold dust. When they finished, the repaired pieces were stunning. The gold lines traced through them like rivers of light. They were no longer functional teacups, but they had become something else. Small sculptures that held their own broken history as part of their beauty. Chiyo kept one of these pieces on her work table where Haru could see it every day. It became a reminder, not of his failure, but of the possibility that mistakes can become teachers, that what we break can be repaired in ways that make it more beautiful, that our flaws and failures, when met with honesty and learning, can become sources of wisdom. Years later, when Haru had become a skilled potter in his own right, he kept his own collection of failed pieces in his workshop. When students came to him worried that they were not talented enough or that they made too many mistakes, he would show them these pieces and tell them the story of the ruined tea set. I thought that mistake would end my career, he would say. I thought I had proven myself unworthy of learning this art. But my master showed me that the mistake was part of the learning. She helped me understand that I was not defined by my worst moment. That growth happens through failure, not in spite of it. The Buddha's wisdom on self-forgiveness for deep regrets is not about pretending we did nothing wrong. It is about understanding that endless self-punishment does not serve anyone. It is about asking what we can learn and who we can become. When we hold on to regrets without allowing them to teach us, we stay frozen as the person who made those mistakes. We refuse to grow. We refuse to change. In a way, we dishonor the harm we caused by learning nothing from it. But when we can acknowledge what we did, feel the appropriate remorse, and then ask what this teaches us about how to live differently, we transform the mistake into wisdom. We become someone who is less likely to cause that kind of harm again. This is how we honor the people we hurt. Not through endless guilt, but through genuine transformation. Take another slow breath and notice what arises as you sit with this teaching. Is there some old regret that you have been carrying? Some mistake that you replay in your mind as evidence of your unworthiness? You do not need to let go of it tonight. You do not need to forgive yourself completely in this moment. But you might ask yourself gently, what has this regret taught me? How has it made me more careful, more compassionate, more aware? Can I see any gold in the cracks of this old break? The Buddhist path teaches that everyone has the capacity to change. The person you were when you made your worst mistake is not the person you are now. You have learned. You have grown. That growth matters. That change is real. Forgiving yourself does not mean you stop being responsible. It means you take responsibility in a way that serves the future rather than just punishing the past. It means you honor the harm you caused by becoming someone who causes less harm going forward. This is not easy work. Deep regrets do not release quickly. They may need to be forgiven again and again, layer by layer, as we grow in our understanding and compassion. But each time we choose transformation over self-punishment, we take a step toward healing. Each time we ask what we can learn rather than how we can suffer, we move closer to peace. The Buddha taught that the purpose of practice is not to become perfect. It is to become free. Free from the cycles of harm and suffering. Free from being controlled by our worst moments. Free to grow and change and become someone new. As you rest tonight, you might hold this possibility gently. That your mistakes, even your serious regrets, do not have to define you. That you can acknowledge what you did, take responsibility for it, and still choose who to become next. That the broken places in your past can be repaired with the gold of understanding and become sources of wisdom and compassion. This is the path of self-forgiveness for deep regrets. Not forgetting, not excusing, but transforming, learning, growing, becoming someone who creates less suffering and more good. This is how we honor both the harm we caused and the potential we still carry to be better than we were. Some hurts go deeper than others. There are the small betrayals and thoughtless words that sting for a moment and then fade. And then there are the wounds that change us, the betrayals that shift the course of our lives, the harm done by people we trusted, the cruelties that seemed deliberate and personal. These deep hurts are different. They cannot be released with a simple decision to let go. They have roots that reach into how we see ourselves and the world. They affect our ability to trust, to open our hearts, to believe that people are fundamentally good. Working with these wounds requires a different kind of patience and gentleness. The Buddha taught that hatred never ceases through hatred. That if we meet cruelty with cruelty, betrayal with bitterness, we only add more suffering to the world. But he also understood that this teaching can feel impossible when we are the ones who have been deeply hurt. How can we not hate someone who deliberately harmed us? How can we forgive something that feels unforgivable? Buddhist wisdom does not ask us to forgive because the person who hurt us deserves it. Most of the time, they do not. It does not ask us to pretend the hurt was not real or that what happened was acceptable. The harm was real. The pain matters. Our anger makes sense. Instead, this ancient wisdom invites us to see forgiveness as something we do for ourselves, as a way of unlocking the prison that resentment builds around our hearts. When we hold on to deep bitterness towards someone who hurt us, we carry them with us everywhere we go. They live in our thoughts. They occupy space in our hearts. They have power over our peace, even years after the harm was done. Forgiveness offers a different path. Not reconciliation with someone who is harmful. Not returning to a relationship that was toxic. Not trusting someone who proved themselves untrustworthy. But an internal release. A gradual process of taking back the power we have given them over our inner life. This kind of forgiveness takes time. It cannot be rushed. It unfolds in layers, often over months or years. Some days we feel we have released the bitterness, and then something triggers the old wound, and we discover we are still carrying it. This is natural. Deep hurts do not heal in straight lines. Tonight we explore this gradual path of deep forgiveness. Not because anyone is demanding we forgive, but because we want to be free. Because we are tired of carrying the weight. Because we deserve peace, even if the person who hurt us never apologizes or changes. Let us begin with a story about a man whose life was upended by betrayal and who slowly found his way to freedom. In a prosperous town, there lived a merchant named Koji who dealt in fine fabrics. He had built his business over 20 years through hard work and careful attention to his customers. He was known as honest and fair, and people traveled from distant villages to buy cloth from him. Koji had a business partner, a man named Takeshi, who had been his friend since childhood. They had grown up together, learned the trade together, and built the business together. Koji trusted Takeshi completely. They were like brothers. One spring, Koji needed to travel to the capital to arrange new trade contracts. The journey would take 2 months. He left Takeshi in charge of the business, as he had done many times before. He had no reason to worry. While Koji was away, Takeshi did something that would destroy everything they had built. He had been gambling secretly for years and had accumulated terrible debts. In desperation, he sold off most of the business's inventory at a loss and took the money to pay his creditors. Then he disappeared, leaving only a brief note that said he was sorry but had no choice. When Koji returned home, he found his shop nearly empty and his reputation in ruins. Customers who had paid for fabric that Takeshi had sold elsewhere were demanding their money back. Creditors were knocking on his door. Word spread quickly through the town that Koji's business was failing. Koji lost everything. His shop, his home, his standing in the community. 20 years of careful work destroyed by the actions of someone he had trusted like family. He tried to rebuild, but the damage was too extensive. People no longer trusted him. They assumed he must have been involved in Takeshi's deception somehow. At first, Koji was numb with shock. He could not believe Takeshi had done this. His mind kept searching for other explanations, some misunderstanding that would make sense of what had happened. But as the reality became clear, the numbness gave way to rage. Koji's anger was like a fire that consumed everything else in his life. He would lie awake at night, imagining confronting Takeshi. He rehearsed speeches about betrayal and friendship. He fantasized about revenge, about somehow making Takeshi suffer as he was suffering. During the day, he could barely function. He took a job as a laborer since he could no longer work as a merchant, but his mind was never on his work. He was always thinking about Takeshi, where he might be, whether he felt any remorse, whether he ever thought about the destruction he had caused. Koji's health began to fail. The constant anger gave him headaches and made his stomach hurt. He stopped seeing friends. He stopped enjoying anything. His entire life became about his bitterness toward Takeshi. 2 years passed this way. 2 years of Koji's life consumed by resentment. He was thinner now, his face lined with stress. His few remaining friends worried about him, but did not know how to help. One evening, an old friend named Masato came to visit. They had known each other for 30 years, and Masato had watched with concern as Koji deteriorated under the weight of his anger. They sat together drinking tea, and Masato asked gently, "Koji, who is suffering more from what Takeshi did, you or Takeshi?" Koji's first reaction was defensive. "How can you ask that? I am the one who lost everything. I am the victim here." "Yes," Masato said calmly. "Takeshi wronged you terribly. What he did was inexcusable. But I am asking, who is suffering more now, 2 years later? Where do you think Takeshi is right now?" Koji had to admit he did not know. Takeshi could be anywhere. He might be living comfortably somewhere, having solved his gambling debts with Koji's money. He might have started a new life and rarely thought about what he had done. "And where are you?" Masato continued. "You are here in this small room with your health failing, unable to sleep, unable to enjoy anything. Your anger has not touched Takeshi at all. It has only consumed you." The words hit Koji like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, but he could not. He could see the truth of what Masato was saying. Takeshi had destroyed his business 2 years ago. But Koji had been destroying himself every day since then with his bitterness. "How do I stop?" Koji asked, and his voice broke. "I do not know how to let this go. Every time I think about what he did, the anger comes back just as strong." Masato was quiet for a moment. "I do not think you can let it go all at once. This wound is too deep for that. But you can begin to loosen your grip on it. You can start choosing your freedom over his punishment." He poured more tea for both of them. "What if you began a small practice?" Masato suggested. "Each morning, when you wake up and the anger is there, you acknowledge it. You say to yourself, 'Yes, I am still angry about what Takeshi did.' That anger makes sense. But then you also say, 'Today I choose my own peace over this bitterness. Just for today, I will not feed this anger.'" Koji looked skeptical. "That is all?" "That is enough to begin with," Masato said. "You do not need to forgive Takeshi completely. You do not need to wish him well or hope you see him again. You just need to start choosing yourself, choosing your health, choosing your life." He leaned forward and spoke with gentle firmness. "Takeshi already took your business and 2 years of your life. How much more will you let him take? He is not here, but you are giving him power over every moment of every day. You are letting him steal your peace, your health, your future. This is a choice you are making, whether you realize it or not." That night, Koji could not sleep as usual. But instead of rehearsing his rage, he thought about Masato's words. The idea that he was choosing to give Takeshi power over him felt uncomfortable, almost insulting. But the more he sat with it, the more he could see its truth. The next morning, Koji tried the practice Masato had suggested. When he woke up and the familiar anger arose, he said quietly to himself, "Yes, I am still angry at Takeshi. What he did was wrong. But today, I choose my peace." Nothing dramatic happened. The anger did not disappear, but he felt something shift slightly, like a door opening just a crack. He had acknowledged the anger without feeding it. He had chosen himself just for that moment. He continued this practice every morning. Some days it felt meaningless. The anger would come back just as strong within minutes. But some days he would notice hours passing without thinking about Takeshi. Small spaces of peace would open up where there had been only bitterness before. Slowly, gradually, over many months, Koji began to reclaim his life. He started to notice things he had not seen in years. The way morning light came through his window, the taste of his food, the kindness of neighbors who greeted him on the street. He realized that he had been so consumed by what he had lost that he could not see what he still had. His health, once he stopped poisoning it with rage. His skills, which no one could take away. His capacity to start again, if he chose to. 3 years after Takeshi's betrayal, Koji had rebuilt a modest version of his old life. He worked as a cloth merchant again, but on a smaller scale. He had a few loyal customers who appreciated his honesty. He would never be as prosperous as he once was, but he had enough. More importantly, he had peace. One day, someone brought him news that Takeshi had been seen in a neighboring town. Koji noticed that this information did not send him into the familiar spiral of rage. He felt something, a tightness in his chest, a brief flash of the old bitterness. But it passed quickly. He realized that he had forgiven Takeshi without ever consciously deciding to. The forgiveness had happened gradually, not through any grand gesture, but through thousands of small choices to prioritize his own peace over his anger. He had released Takeshi from the locked room in his mind where he had been holding him prisoner. The forgiveness did not mean he trusted Takeshi. It did not mean he would ever want to see him again. It did not mean what Takeshi had done was acceptable. It simply meant he had stopped giving Takeshi power over his inner life. He had stopped letting the betrayal define every moment. When people asked him years later how he had recovered from such a devastating loss, Koji would say, "Takeshi took my business. That was his choice and his wrong. But I was giving him my peace, my health, my future. That was my choice. When I finally understood that, I could stop." Take a gentle breath and notice what this story brings up for you. Koji's journey shows us that forgiving deep hurt is not a single decision, but a gradual practice. Each morning he chose his peace. Each day he loosened his grip on the bitterness just a little. Over time, these small choices added up to freedom. The wisdom here is important to understand clearly. Koji did not forgive because Takeshi deserved it. Takeshi never apologized. He never made amends. He likely never even knew that Koji had forgiven him. The forgiveness was entirely for Koji's benefit. It was how he took back his life from the betrayal. This is what Buddhist teaching means when it talks about forgiveness of those who hurt us deeply. It is not about the other person at all. It is about refusing to remain in the prison that resentment builds. It is about choosing freedom over the desire for revenge. The person who wronged us may never apologize. They may never change. They may never face consequences for what they did. We cannot control any of that. What we can control is whether we continue to give them power over our inner life. Take another slow breath and let these teachings settle. If you are carrying a deep hurt tonight, know that you do not need to forgive it before morning. Forgiveness of serious harm is not a single decision, but a gradual unfolding. It requires patience and gentleness with yourself. The Buddhist wisdom on forgiving those who hurt us deeply is ultimately about freedom. Not freedom from the memory of what happened, which may always be there, but freedom from being controlled by it. Freedom from giving the person who hurt us ongoing power over our peace. This freedom comes not through force, but through gentle, persistent practice. Through choosing our peace a little bit each day. Through offering ourselves the compassion we may have been denying. Through gradually loosening our grip on the bitterness that has been burning our own hands. The locked gate that keeps us imprisoned is made of our own resentment. We can unlock it, not because the person who hurt us deserves our forgiveness, but because we deserve to be free. Not all at once, but slowly, patiently, one small choice at a time. As you rest tonight, you might simply acknowledge whatever hurt you are carrying. You do not need to resolve it. You do not need to forgive it fully, but you might offer yourself compassion for carrying it. You might choose, just for tonight, to prioritize your own peace over the bitterness. That is enough. That is the beginning. There is a difference between guilt and shame that the Buddha understood deeply. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. Guilt looks at our actions and asks how we can do better. Shame looks at our very being and declares us fundamentally flawed. Guilt can be useful. It can wake us up to the effects of our actions. It can motivate us to change and grow. It points to specific behaviors we want to improve. But shame goes deeper. It tells us that something is wrong with who we are at our core, that we are not enough, that we will never be enough. Many of us carry this weight of shame without even realizing it. It becomes so familiar that we mistake it for truth. We believe the voice that says we are not good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. We think this harsh self-judgment is just being realistic about our flaws. But the Buddha taught something different. He taught that underneath all our conditioning, all our mistakes, all our imperfections, there is something pure and untouched. Buddha nature, it is called. The fundamental goodness that exists in every being. This nature cannot be damaged by our mistakes or diminished by our failures. It is always there, like the sky behind the clouds. Shame keeps us from seeing this truth. It convinces us that the clouds are all there is, that our mistakes and imperfections define us completely, that we need to earn our worthiness through perfect behavior or achievements. Tonight, we work with shame itself. Not the specific things we feel ashamed about, but the deeper belief that we are somehow fundamentally not enough. This is tender work. It requires great gentleness. We approach it not with force, but with the lightest touch, like touching a bruise that is still healing. The Buddhist path offers a way through shame that might surprise you. It does not ask you to overcome your imperfections or to become someone better. It invites you to see that your worthiness was never in question. That the one who is aware of your thoughts and feelings, the consciousness reading these words right now, is already complete just as it is. Let us begin with a story about a student who struggled with this very teaching. In a meditation hall tucked into a quiet valley, there was a young student named Ayumi who had come to practice with great sincerity. She had read many books about meditation and enlightenment. She had heard stories of masters who could sit perfectly still for hours, their minds like clear pools of water. She wanted this for herself. But when Ayumi actually tried to meditate, nothing went as she expected. Her mind wandered constantly. She would set the intention to follow her breath, and within moments she would be planning her day or replaying a conversation or thinking about what to eat for lunch. She tried harder. She concentrated with all her effort. But the thoughts just kept coming. After each meditation session, Ayumi would feel a heavy sense of failure. Other students seemed to sit so peacefully. They looked serene and focused. She was certain they were having profound experiences while she struggled with the most basic instruction. Something must be wrong with her. She must not be cut out for this practice. The shame grew each day. Ayumi began to dread meditation periods. She would sit on her cushion feeling like an imposter. Everyone else belonged here. Everyone else could do this. She was the only one failing so completely. One evening, after a particularly difficult sitting where her mind had been especially scattered, Ayumi approached her teacher with tears in her eyes. The teacher, an elderly woman named Setsuko, invited her to sit and share what was troubling her. "I cannot do this," Ayumi said, her voice breaking. "I have been here for 2 months, and I am no better at meditation than when I started. My mind wanders constantly. I cannot concentrate. I must be doing something fundamentally wrong." Teacher Setsuko listened with kind attention. When Ayumi finished, the teacher was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a simple question. "When your mind wanders during meditation, who notices that it has wandered?" Ayumi looked confused. "I do. I notice that I am thinking instead of following my breath. And in that moment of noticing, are you aware?" "Yes, of course." "So there is awareness there," Setsuko said gently. "Awareness that notices when attention has drifted. That awareness is what we are cultivating in meditation, not the ability to stop all thoughts. The awareness that sees thoughts as they come and go." She gestured toward the window where the evening sky was visible. "Tell me, what do you see when you look outside?" Ayumi looked. "I see the sky. Some clouds. The mountains in the distance." "Do the clouds ruin the sky?" Setsuko asked. "No, they are just passing through." "Exactly. The sky does not push the clouds away or judge itself for having clouds in it. The sky simply holds whatever appears and disappears. It remains spacious and clear regardless of what passes through it." The teacher looked at Ayumi with gentle eyes. "Your awareness is like the sky. Your thoughts are like clouds. They come and go. Some days there are more clouds, some days fewer. But the sky is always there, always clear in its own nature, regardless of what passes through it." Ayumi started to understand, but felt resistance. "But I want to be able to meditate properly. To have a quiet mind like the advanced students." "What makes you think their minds are quiet?" Setsuko asked with a soft laugh. "I have been practicing for 40 years and my mind still produces thoughts like a river produces water. The difference is not that my mind is empty. The difference is that I no longer judge myself for having a mind that thinks." She leaned forward slightly. "You are creating suffering not because your mind wanders, but because you are attacking yourself each time it does. The wandering mind is just weather passing through the sky. your harsh judgment, your certainty that something is wrong with you. That is the extra layer of pain you are adding. Ayumi felt something loosen in her chest. She had been so focused on her failure to achieve a perfectly quiet mind that she had not noticed the cruelty of her inner voice. Each wandering thought had been met with harsh criticism. Of course, I cannot do this. I am not good enough. Something is wrong with me. What should I do differently? She asked. Try meeting your wandering mind with kindness instead of criticism, Setsuko suggested. When you notice you have been thinking, instead of attacking yourself, simply note it gently. Thinking. And then return to your breath. No drama. No judgment. Just a gentle return, like a grandmother redirecting a wandering child. Over the following weeks, Ayumi practiced this new approach. At first, it felt strange to be kind to herself when her mind wandered. The old habit of self-criticism was strong, but gradually she began to notice a difference. When she met her scattered attention with gentleness instead of judgment, meditation became easier. Not because her mind produced fewer thoughts, but because she was no longer fighting a war with herself. The thoughts came and went. She noticed them. She returned to her breath. Sometimes she returned 50 times in a single sitting. But each return was gentle now, not harsh. Months later, Ayumi realized that she had learned something more valuable than how to quiet her mind. She had learned how to stop abandoning herself, how to meet her imperfections with the same kindness she would offer a friend, how to see that awareness itself, the part that noticed thoughts coming and going, was never flawed or failing. The shame she had carried about not being good enough at meditation had dissolved not because she became perfect at it, but because she stopped demanding perfection. She had discovered that the sky of her awareness was always clear, even when filled with the clouds of wandering thoughts. Take a breath here and feel what this story might be offering you. How much suffering do we create by demanding that we be different than we are? How much shame comes from believing we should be further along, better at things, more accomplished, or more peaceful? The wisdom in Ayumi's story is simple but profound. The problem was never her wandering mind. The problem was the harsh judgment she brought to her wandering mind. When she learned to meet herself with gentleness, everything changed. Not because she became perfect, but because she stopped requiring perfection. This teaching reaches into every area of our lives. We carry shame about so many things. Our bodies, our struggles with habits or emotions, our inability to be as calm or confident or successful as we think we should be. All of this shame rests on the belief that we are not enough as we are. But what if that belief is simply not true? What if, like the sky holding clouds, our fundamental nature is already complete? What if our struggles and imperfections are just weather passing through, not evidence of our unworthiness? Let us explore another story that shows this teaching from a different angle. In a mountain village, there lived a woodcarver named Kaito, who was known throughout the region for the beauty of his work. He could transform ordinary blocks of wood into elegant bowls, graceful statues, and intricate decorative pieces. People would travel to his workshop to watch him work and to purchase his creations. One spring day, a young man named Hideo came to Kaito's workshop, hoping to become an apprentice. Hideo had always admired fine craftsmanship and dreamed of learning this skill. When Kaito agreed to teach him, Hideo felt his dream was beginning. But as Hideo began to learn, he became increasingly discouraged. His hands fumbled with the tools. His cuts were uneven. The wood would split in the wrong places. He would watch Kaito's hands move with fluid grace and then look at his own clumsy efforts and feel deep shame. One afternoon, after Hideo had ruined yet another piece of wood through a careless cut, he threw down his tools in frustration. "I will never be able to do this," he said bitterly. "My hands are not made for this work. I am wasting your time." Kaito set down his own tools and looked at his apprentice with calm eyes. He held up his weathered hands for Hideo to see. They were gnarled and scarred, with calluses on every finger and old cuts that had healed into white lines. "Look at these hands," Kaito said. "What do you see?" Hideo looked closely. "I see the hands of a master craftsman. Hands that have done this work for many years." "Look again," Kaito said. "What else?" Hideo studied the hands more carefully. He saw the scars, the places where tools had slipped, the marks of burns from hot oil used to finish wood, the crooked finger that had clearly been broken at some point and healed slightly wrong. "I see scars," Hideo said. "Marks from mistakes and accidents." Kaito nodded. "Each of these scars tells a story of learning. This one," he pointed to a long white line across his palm, "happened when I was about your age. I was trying to carve too quickly and the chisel slipped. I thought I had ruined my hand forever. I was certain I would never be able to carve again." He showed Hideo another scar. This one came from not respecting the grain of the wood. "I forced a cut that the wood did not want to make, and the piece split and caught my thumb. That mistake taught me to work with wood, not against it." He held up his crooked finger. "This I broke when a heavy piece fell on my hand because I had not secured it properly. That taught me patience and the importance of proper setup." Kaito set his hands down on the workbench. "My hands are skilled not despite these scars, but because of them. Each mark represents a lesson learned. Each imperfection comes from the courage to keep trying, even after failure. If I had given up the first time I cut myself or broke a piece, my hands would be smooth and unmarked. They would also be useless for this work." He looked at Hideo with gentle understanding. "You look at your mistakes and see only failure. You think your clumsy hands prove you are not meant for this. But I look at my scarred hands and see my entire apprenticeship written there. The only difference between a master and a beginner is time and willingness to keep learning from mistakes." Hideo felt tears building behind his eyes. He had been so ashamed of his failures, so convinced that they proved he was not good enough. But Kaito was showing him that mistakes were not obstacles to learning. They were the path of learning itself. "But what if I never get good at this?" Hideo asked. "What if I keep making mistakes forever?" Kaito smiled. "I still make mistakes. Last week, I misjudged a cut and ruined a piece I had been working on for 3 days. The difference is not that I no longer make mistakes. The difference is that I no longer believe mistakes mean I am not worthy of doing this work." He picked up a piece of wood and ran his scarred fingers along its grain. "Perfectionism is the enemy of craftsmanship," he said. "If you need every cut to be perfect before you feel allowed to continue, you will never create anything. But if you can see each imperfect cut as information, as teaching, as part of the process, then mistakes become your friends instead of your enemies." Over the months and years that followed, Hideo slowly developed his skills. His hands became marked with their own scars. Some cuts went wrong. Some pieces split. Sometimes his work fell short of what he envisioned. But he learned to meet each mistake with curiosity instead of shame. What can this teach me? How can I adjust my approach? Decades later, when Hideo had become a master craftsman himself with students of his own, he would often hold up his weathered hands to show them. "See these scars?" he would say. "These are not marks of failure. These are evidence that I was willing to try, to fail, to learn, and to try again. These imperfect hands have created more beauty than perfect, unmarked hands ever could. Because perfect hands would mean I never took the risk of learning." He would tell his students what Kaito had told him all those years ago. That shame comes from believing our imperfections disqualify us. That freedom comes from understanding that our imperfections are simply part of being human, part of learning, part of having the courage to engage with life instead of standing safely on the sidelines. Both Ayumi and Hideo learned the same essential teaching. The shame they carried was based on a false belief. Ayumi believed her wandering mind meant she was bad at meditation. Hideo believed his mistakes meant he was not meant to be a craftsman. Both discovered that what they saw as evidence of their unworthiness was actually just evidence of being human and learning. The Buddhist understanding of shame is rooted in this insight. We are not our mistakes. We are not our imperfections. We are not our struggles or our failures. These are just experiences passing through the awareness that we are. Like clouds passing through the sky, like scars on hands that work with wood. Our fundamental nature, what Buddhism calls Buddha nature, is never damaged by our imperfections. The awareness that notices our mistakes is itself never mistaken. The consciousness that feels shame is itself not shameful. There is something in us that remains whole and complete regardless of what we have done or failed to do. This is not a belief we need to force ourselves to accept. It is something we can discover through gentle inquiry. Who is it that feels shame? Who is aware of feeling not enough? When we turn attention back to the awareness itself, we find something that was never broken and never needed fixing. Shame dissolves not through achieving perfection, but through recognizing that we never needed to be perfect in the first place. Like Setsuko told Ayumi, the sky does not push away clouds or judge itself for having them. It simply remains spacious and clear while weather passes through. Take another slow breath and notice what happens when you imagine meeting yourself with this kind of acceptance. Not forcing yourself to be different, but simply allowing yourself to be as you are in this moment. Thoughts and all. Imperfections and all. Struggles and all. The weight of shame is so heavy because we are carrying it alone, convinced we are the only ones who are flawed. But everyone struggles. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has thoughts that wander and hands that fumble when learning new skills. The only difference between people who seem free from shame and those who carry it is not that some people are perfect. It is that some people have learned to meet their imperfections with gentleness. You can begin this practice right now if you wish. Notice any area of your life where you carry shame, where you believe you should be different, better, further along. Do not try to fix it or change it. Simply notice it with the same gentle awareness that Setsuko taught Ayumi to bring to her wandering mind. Ah, there is shame about this. There is the belief that I am not enough. Can I meet this feeling with kindness instead of more judgment? You do not need to believe you are perfect. You do not need to pretend your struggles do not exist. You simply need to stop adding the extra layer of shame on top of your human imperfection. You can acknowledge, yes, I struggle with this, without also concluding, and therefore I am fundamentally flawed. The Buddha taught that we each have the seeds of awakening within us already. Not as something we need to earn or achieve, but as our basic nature. Shame keeps us from seeing this. It convinces us we are not worthy yet, that we need to become someone different before we can be at peace. But the teaching points in the opposite direction. Peace comes from accepting ourselves as we are. Not as we will be someday when we have fixed all our flaws, but right now, exactly as we are. With wandering minds and scarred hands, and all the beautiful evidence of being human and learning. This acceptance is not complacency. Ayumi still practiced meditation. Hideo still worked to improve his skills. We can want to grow and learn without believing our current imperfection makes us unworthy. We can work toward being better tomorrow while still being gentle with who we are today. The weight of shame lifts when we understand this. When we stop demanding that we be further along before we deserve our own kindness. When we see our struggles not as evidence of unworthiness, but as evidence of being alive and engaged with the challenging work of learning and growing. As you rest tonight, you might experiment with this gentler way of meeting yourself. When thoughts arise about things you feel ashamed of, see if you can meet them with curiosity instead of judgment. What is this shame trying to protect me from? What false belief is underneath it? You might discover, as Ayumi and Hideo did, that the shame was never based on truth, that you were always enough, that your awareness, the consciousness experiencing these words right now, is already complete and whole, that the scars and struggles are not evidence of unworthiness, but evidence of courage, of showing up, of trying, of being beautifully, imperfectly human. The Buddhist path does not ask you to overcome your humanity. It invites you to embrace it fully, to see that enlightenment is not the absence of clouds, but the recognition that the sky was never touched by them. To understand that you do not need to earn your worthiness through perfection, because worthiness was never something that could be earned or lost. This is the gift that releasing shame offers. Not the achievement of being perfect, but the freedom of being perfectly okay with being imperfect. Not the pride of having no scars, but the wisdom of seeing scars as teachers. Not the fantasy of a mind with no thoughts, but the peace of a heart that no longer wages war against its own humanity. Let yourself settle into this possibility tonight, that you are enough. That you have always been enough, that the part of you aware of these words is whole and complete exactly as it is. Let the weight of shame dissolve in the gentle light of this understanding. You do not need to carry it anymore. You never needed to carry it at all. We are all storytellers. Every day, without realizing it, we tell ourselves stories about who we are, stories about what has happened to us, stories about what our experiences mean. These narratives become so familiar that we mistake them for truth. We forget that they are interpretations, not facts. Some of these stories serve us well. They help us make sense of our lives and learn from our experiences. But other stories trap us. They become cages we cannot see because we have lived inside them for so long. We build entire identities around old wounds or past mistakes, and then we wonder why we cannot move forward. The Buddha taught about this deeply. He understood that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from the stories we tell about what happens. Two people can experience the same event and emerge with completely different narratives. One might see a difficulty as a temporary setback. Another might see it as proof of their fundamental unworthiness. The event is the same. The story changes everything. In Buddhist practice, there is a teaching about non-self. This does not mean we do not exist. It means the self we think we are, the solid, unchanging identity we cling to, is actually more fluid than we realize. We are not fixed beings. We are processes of continuous change. But we freeze ourselves in stories about who we are. I am someone who was betrayed. I am someone who failed. I am someone who cannot be trusted. I am someone nobody values. These stories feel so real. We have evidence for them. We can point to events that prove them. But evidence is not the same as truth. And the most important question is not whether these stories are accurate, but whether they are useful. Whether they help us grow or keep us stuck. Tonight we explore the stories we tell about ourselves, especially the ones built on old wounds and regrets. We look at how these narratives become our identity and what happens when we gently begin to question them. This is tender work because these stories have often protected us in some way. They have made sense of our pain. They have given us explanations for why things happened as they did. We approach this exploration with great care. We are not trying to erase our history or pretend difficult things did not happen. We are simply asking whether the story we have been telling is the only possible story. Whether there might be other ways to understand our experiences that create more space for healing and growth. Let us begin with a story about someone whose entire identity became wrapped around an old wound. In a small farming village, there lived a man named Takeo who was known by everyone as the Exile. This was not his name at birth, but it had become his name over the years. The story of his exile had become who he was. When Takeo was a young man, barely 20 years old, he had been involved in a dispute with a powerful family in the village. The details were complicated and had faded with time, but the outcome was clear. Takeo was blamed for something that damaged the family's property. The village council, influenced by the powerful family, decided that Takeo must leave the village for 5 years as punishment. This was a harsh sentence. Takeo had lived his entire life in this village. His family was there. His friends. Everything familiar. But he accepted the judgment and left, going to live in the wilderness at the edge of the territory, surviving through hunting and foraging. The 5 years passed slowly. Takeo lived alone, seeing other people only rarely when he would come to the edge of the village to trade furs for basic supplies. During those long years, he built an entire identity around his exile. He was the one who had been wronged. The one who had been cast out unfairly. The one who suffered while others lived comfortably in their homes. This story became so central to who he was that he thought about it constantly. Every difficult moment in the wilderness reinforced it. Every cold night, every meager meal, every day of loneliness was added to the evidence of his victimhood. The narrative grew stronger and more solid with each passing season. When the 5 years ended, Takeo could return to the village if he wished. The sentence was complete. The punishment served. But something unexpected happened. Takeo did not return. Months passed after he was free to come back. Then a year. Then 2. People from the village occasionally saw him at the edge of the territory, but he would not come closer. When they asked why he did not return, he would give vague answers about not being welcome, about the village not wanting him. Finally, after 3 years of freedom that Takeo still spent in exile, one of the village elders made the long journey to find him. This elder, a woman named Hana, who had known Takeo since childhood, sat with him by his small fire and asked him directly, "Takeo, why do you still live out here? Your punishment ended 3 years ago. You are free to return. Many people would welcome you back." Takeo stared into the fire, his face hard. "They exiled me. They decided I was not worthy of living among them. That has not changed." "But it has changed," Hana said gently. "The sentence is over. The powerful family that pushed for your exile has moved to another region. The people who remember the incident at all remember it differently now, with more sympathy for your situation. You are carrying a story that no longer matches reality." Takeo shook his head stubbornly. "I know who I am. I am the one who was cast out. The one nobody wanted. That is the truth." Hana was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire dance. Then she asked a question that would echo in Takeo's mind for months to come. "Who would you be if you were not the exile? If that story was no longer available to you, who would you become?" The question unsettled Takeo deeply. He had no answer. For so many years, his entire sense of self had been built on this narrative of being wronged, being cast out, being the victim of injustice. Without that story, he did not know who he was. After Hana left, Takeo could not stop thinking about her question. He began to see how he had constructed his whole identity around the exile. It explained everything about his life. Why he was alone. Why he struggled. Why he could not be happy. The exile story justified all of it. But Hana had shown him something troubling. The village would welcome him back. The circumstances that had led to his exile had changed or been forgotten. He was the only one still holding on to this narrative. He was the one keeping himself in exile, not because he had to, but because without this story, he did not know who to be. Over the following weeks, Takeo began to notice other stories he had been telling himself. That he was permanently damaged by what happened. That he could never trust people again. That the wilderness was where he belonged because civilized society had rejected him. Each of these stories felt true. Each had evidence supporting it. But were they the only possible interpretations of his experience? One morning, Takeo woke up and tried something different. He asked himself, what if I told this story differently? What if instead of being the eternal exile, I was someone who survived a difficult period and learned resilience? What if, instead of being the victim of injustice, I was someone who paid a penalty, served his time, and was now free to choose his path? These alternative stories felt strange and uncomfortable. They did not have the familiar weight of the exile narrative. But they also felt lighter, more open. They contained possibility instead of just explaining why possibility was closed to him. Slowly, carefully, Takeo began to test these new stories. He started making more frequent trips to the village edge. He had longer conversations with people who came by. He noticed that most people did not treat him like an exile. They treated him like someone who lived in the wilderness by choice, someone interesting and independent. Eventually, Takeo built a small cabin at the border between the wilderness and the village lands. Not quite returning to the village center, but no longer isolating himself completely. He began offering his skills as a hunter and tracker to help villagers when they needed it. He slowly built new relationships based on who he was now, not who he had been 20 years ago. Years later, when young people would ask him about his life, Takeo would tell them the facts of what happened. The dispute, the exile, the years alone. But he would also tell them about the moment he realized he was keeping himself in exile long after he was free to leave. About the question Hana asked that changed everything. About learning that the stories we tell ourselves can become prisons we cannot see. "I thought the exile defined me," he would say. "I thought it was the truth of who I was. But it was just one possible story about a period of my life. When I finally saw that, I could choose a different story. Not by denying what happened, but by refusing to let it be the only thing that mattered." Take a gentle breath here and notice what Takeo's story brings up for you. How many of us are living in exiles of our own making? How many identities have we built around old wounds that we keep reinforcing long after the circumstances have changed? The wisdom in this story is subtle but powerful. Takeo was not wrong that he had been exiled. That was a fact. But the meaning he gave to that fact, the way it became his entire identity, that was a choice. A choice he did not realize he was making. When he finally saw that the story was just a story, not an unchangeable truth, he could begin to imagine other possibilities. This teaching about releasing old narratives is central to forgiveness work in Buddhism. Often, what we need to forgive is not just the event itself, but the story we have been telling about what it means. The story that we are permanently damaged, that we can never trust again, that we are fundamentally different from others because of what happened to us. These stories can feel protective. They explain our pain. They give us a clear identity, even if it is a painful one. Sometimes we hold on to them because letting them go feels like losing ourselves. Like Takeo asking, "Who would I be without this story?" But the Buddha taught that this fear is based on a misunderstanding. We are not our stories. We are the awareness that experiences stories. When we release an old narrative, we do not lose ourselves. We simply become free to discover who we are without that particular limitation. Let us explore another story that shows this from a different perspective, focusing on stories built around our failures rather than wounds done to us. In a town known for its scholars and teachers, there lived a man named Fumio, who had once been a promising student. As a young man, he had shown great talent for mathematics and philosophy. His teachers predicted he would become an important thinker, perhaps even advising the regional governor on matters of policy and governance. But when Fumio took the examination that would qualify him for advanced study, something went terribly wrong. Whether from nervousness or lack of preparation or simple bad luck, he performed poorly. He did not just fail to excel. He failed completely, scoring lower than students with far less natural ability. This failure devastated Fumio. It was not just a setback. It became, in his mind, the defining moment of his life. The moment that revealed his true nature. He had always believed he was talented and intelligent. The exam showed him he was wrong. He was actually just mediocre, someone whose early promise was only illusion. After this failure, Fumio gave up on scholarly pursuits entirely. He took work as a clerk, copying documents for merchants. It was simple work that required little thought. He told himself this was appropriate for someone of his actual limited abilities. The talented student had been a false identity. The failed clerk was the truth. Years passed. Fumio went through his days mechanically, seeing himself as someone who had tried to be more than he was and been revealed as ordinary. This story was so solid in his mind that it colored everything. When younger clerks were promoted past him, it confirmed his failure. When someone suggested he might try teaching or pursue further study, he would shake his head sadly. That path was closed to him. He had proven he was not capable. One day, a new supervisor arrived at the merchant house where Fumio worked. This supervisor, a woman named Yuki, had an unusual background. She had failed the same examination 3 times before finally passing on her 4th attempt. She was now known as one of the sharpest minds in the merchant guild. Yuki noticed that Fumio's work was exceptionally precise and thoughtful. His copies were not just accurate. He would sometimes note inconsistencies in the original documents or suggest clearer ways to phrase complex ideas. This was far beyond what was expected from a clerk. After watching Fumio for several weeks, Yuki called him to her office. "You have an unusual mind," she said directly. "I have read your margin notes on the documents you copy. You see patterns and implications that escape most scholars. Why are you working as a clerk?" Fumio felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I am suited for this work. I tried to pursue scholarship once, but I failed. This is where I belong." "You failed an examination once?" Yuki asked. "And from that single event, you concluded you have no scholarly ability?" "It was not just any examination," Fumio said. "It was the qualifying exam. I scored terribly. It showed me I was not as capable as I thought." Yuki leaned back in her chair and studied him. "I failed that examination 3 times. 3 separate occasions where I did not meet the standard. By your logic, I should have given up after the first failure and accepted that I was not capable. Instead, I learned from each attempt and eventually passed." Fumio started to object, but Yuki continued. "Let me ask you something. What story have you been telling yourself about that exam?" "The story?" Fumio was confused. "I failed. That is not a story. That is what happened." "You took an exam and received a low score," Yuki agreed. "That is a fact. But what story did you build on top of that fact? What meaning did you give it?" Fumio thought about this. "I told myself it revealed the truth about my abilities. That my earlier success had been luck or illusion, and the exam showed my real level of capability." "That is one possible story," Yuki said. "But is it the only one? What if you told a different story? That you had one bad day? That you were not prepared for that particular format of examination? That you allowed nervousness to interfere with your thinking? That failure is a normal part of learning, not evidence of fundamental inadequacy?" Fumio felt resistance rising. "But I did fail. Completely. These other stories feel like making excuses. Are they excuses, or are they equally valid interpretations of what happened?" Yuki asked. "You have spent years believing that one exam defined your entire intellectual capacity. You have built your whole identity around being someone who failed. But I look at your work every day and see someone with a sharp, analytical mind. Which evidence should we trust more? One exam from years ago, or the consistent quality of your thinking now? She leaned forward. I think you have been living in a story that is too small for you. A story that explained your pain but trapped you in limitation. The question is whether you are willing to consider a larger story. Not one that denies the failure, but one that puts it in perspective as one difficult moment in a much longer journey. Over the following months, Yuki gave Fumio increasingly complex tasks. She would ask his opinion on difficult contracts and policy matters. She encouraged him to study again, not for any examination, but simply to develop his thinking. At first, Fumio approached this with deep anxiety. The old story was so strong. He expected to fail, to prove once again that he was not capable. But as he engaged with challenging material and found he could understand it, as his insights proved valuable to Yuki and the merchant house, the old story began to loosen its grip. He began to see that his failure on that long-ago exam was just one event, not the definition of his capabilities. He had told himself a story that one bad performance revealed his true nature. But what if his true nature was better shown by years of careful, intelligent work? What if the exam was the aberration, not his baseline? This realization did not come easily or all at once. The old story had roots that went deep. But gradually, Fumio began to try on different narratives. Instead of "I am someone who failed and proved myself inadequate," he experimented with "I am someone who had a setback and then spent years developing my skills in other ways." Instead of "I am not capable of scholarly work," he tried "I am capable of deep thinking even if I do not perform well under examination pressure." These new stories felt strange at first, like wearing clothes that did not quite fit. But over time, they began to feel more natural, more accurate, more true to the entirety of his experience rather than just one painful moment. Years later, Fumio became a respected advisor in the Merchant Guild, known for his careful analysis and wise counsel. When younger workers would come to him discouraged by failures or setbacks, he would tell them about the examination he failed and how it became his identity for so many years. "I told myself a story that one failure meant I was a failure," he would say. That story felt completely true. I had evidence for it. But it was still just a story, just one way of interpreting what happened. When I finally saw that, I could choose a story that served me better. Not by denying the failure, but by refusing to let it define everything else. Both Takeo and Fumio show us how we build identities around our wounds and failures. Takeo became the eternal exile. Fumio became the failed scholar. These identities felt solid and true. They explained their pain and their limitations, but they were also cages that kept them from growing and changing. The Buddhist teaching on non-self points to this directly. We think we are fixed, solid beings with unchanging identities. But actually, we are fluid, always changing, always capable of growth and transformation. The stories we tell about ourselves can honor that fluidity, or they can freeze us in old patterns. When we work with forgiveness, we are often working with these stories. We are forgiving not just events, but the narratives we built around events. The story that we are permanently damaged. The story that we are fundamentally flawed. The story that what happened to us, or what we did, defines us completely and forever. These stories deserve compassion. We did not create them to torture ourselves. We created them to make sense of painful experiences, to explain why things happened. to protect ourselves from future hurt. But now we can ask gently whether these old stories still serve us or whether they have become prisons. Take another slow breath and notice what stories you might be carrying. Are there narratives about yourself that have become so familiar you never question them? Are there ways you define yourself based on old wounds or failures that might be ready to be released or reimagined? You do not need to abandon your stories violently or pretend your experiences were not real. But you might ask, like Hana asked Takeo, who would you be if this story was no longer available? What would become possible if you were not carrying this particular narrative? The Buddha taught that we are not our thoughts, not our feelings, not our stories. We are the awareness that experiences all of these. When we realize this, we can hold our narratives more lightly. We can see them as interpretations, not facts, as tools that might be useful or limiting, rather than as unquestionable truths. This does not mean we become people without history or without identity. It means we stop being imprisoned by one particular version of our history. We can acknowledge what happened while refusing to let it be the only thing that matters. We can honor our wounds while declining to build our entire self around them. Forgiveness, in this context, becomes about forgiving the story as much as the event. Forgiving ourselves for holding on to narratives that limited us. Forgiving others not by condoning what they did, but by refusing to let what they did be the center of our identity forever. When Takeo finally returned to the village, he was not denying his exile. He was acknowledging it as something that happened, not as something that defined him eternally. When Fumio embraced his analytical mind again, he was not pretending the failed exam never occurred. He was refusing to let it be the only evidence that mattered. This is the freedom that comes from questioning our stories. Not the freedom from having a past, but the freedom to interpret that past in ways that allow growth rather than just explaining limitation. Not the freedom from difficulty, but the freedom to find meaning in difficulty that serves our evolution rather than our stagnation. As you rest tonight, you might hold your stories lightly. Notice them as stories, not as absolute truths. Notice that you are the teller of these stories, which means you have some choice in how you tell them. Not choice about what happened, but choice about what it means. Choice about whether it defines you completely or is simply part of your larger journey. The stories we tell ourselves create the worlds we live in. When we tell ourselves stories of permanent damage, we live in a world where healing is impossible. When we tell ourselves stories of fundamental flaw, we live in a world where we are never enough. But when we question these narratives gently and allow for other possibilities, we create space for transformation. This is the gift of releasing old stories. Not forgetting our history, but freeing ourselves from being imprisoned by one particular interpretation of it. Not becoming someone without a past, but becoming someone whose past no longer determines their future. Not erasing our wounds, but refusing to let our wounds be our only identity. The Buddha's wisdom on forgiveness includes this understanding that we can forgive the stories themselves, the narratives we built to explain our pain, the identities we constructed around our wounds and failures. We can honor that these stories served a purpose while gently acknowledging that we might be ready for a larger story now. A story that includes the difficulty but is not defined solely by it. A story that allows for healing, growth, and the possibility of becoming someone new while still honoring who we have been. Let yourself rest in this possibility, that you are more than any single story about yourself, that your identity is more fluid and spacious than the narratives you have been carrying. that you can acknowledge your past while remaining open to your future. That forgiveness can include forgiving yourself for the stories you told to survive, and gently, when you are ready, setting them down to discover what emerges when you are no longer carrying them. Forgiveness is not a destination we reach and then remain at forever. It is a practice we return to again and again. This might sound discouraging at first. We want to forgive something once, be done with it, and move on. We want to resolve our pain permanently and never have to think about it again. But the Buddha taught a different understanding. He taught that everything is impermanent, always changing, always in motion. Our forgiveness is like this too. Some days we feel we have released an old hurt completely. Other days it resurfaces with surprising force, as if no time has passed at all. This is not failure. This is the nature of healing. In Buddhist practice, there is great emphasis on beginning again. When we sit in meditation and notice our mind has wandered, we do not criticize ourselves for losing focus. We simply begin again, returning our attention to the breath. When we find ourselves caught in old patterns of thinking or behaving, we do not declare ourselves hopeless. We begin again, choosing differently in this moment. This same principle applies to forgiveness. We might forgive someone or something, feel a sense of peace, and then days or weeks later find the old resentment returning. We might work through our guilt about a mistake, feel free from it, and then encounter something that brings all the shame flooding back. When this happens, we have not lost our progress. We are simply being given another opportunity to practice. The wisdom here is profound but simple. Each moment is genuinely new. Each breath is a fresh beginning. What happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago exists only as memory now. In this present moment, we have a choice. We can pick up the old stories and resentments again, or we can gently set them down once more. Not with the burden of having to do it perfectly or permanently, but with the lightness of knowing we can always begin again. This teaching brings great relief when we truly understand it. We do not have to get forgiveness right once and for all. We do not have to achieve some permanent state of peace that never wavers. We simply need to be willing to return to the practice of letting go over and over with patience and gentleness toward ourselves. Tonight, we explore this practice of beginning again. How to work with forgiveness as an ongoing returning rather than a one-time achievement. How to meet ourselves with compassion when old wounds resurface. How to see each moment as a genuine opportunity for a fresh start. Let us begin with a story about someone who discovered this practice through their daily work. In a mountain monastery, there lived a monk named Oshin, whose task was to ring the large bronze bell that called the community to meditation each dawn. This was considered an important responsibility. The sound of the bell carried across the valley, marking the beginning of each day, not just for the monks, but for the farmers and villagers who lived nearby. Oshin had been ringing the bell for 15 years. He would rise in the darkness, walk to the bell tower, and strike the bell with the large wooden mallet in a rhythm passed down through generations. 3 slow strikes, a pause, 3 more strikes, another pause, continuing until the sequence was complete. For many years, Oshin approached this task with simple devotion. He would ring the bell with full attention, listening to how the sound moved through the morning air, feeling the vibration through his hands. It was a meditation in itself, a way of beginning each day with presence and purpose. But then something changed. Oshin's elderly mother, who lived in a village 2 days' journey from the monastery, became ill. He was able to visit her only occasionally, and each time he returned to the monastery, he carried worry with him. He felt guilty for not being there to care for her. He resented the monastic rules that limited how often he could leave. He was angry at the illness itself and his powerlessness to help. These feelings began to color everything, including his bell ringing. Now, when he walked to the bell tower in the dark mornings, his mind was full of troubled thoughts. When he struck the bell, he was thinking about his mother rather than being present with the sound. His resentment would rise up, making his chest feel tight and his hands move with tension rather than ease. Some mornings the resentment was toward the monastery itself. Why did they keep him here when his mother needed him? Other mornings it was toward his siblings who lived near his mother but did not seem to care for her as conscientiously as he would. Sometimes it was toward himself, guilt about not being there, shame about his inability to fix the situation. Oshin noticed that the quality of the bell sound changed on these difficult mornings. It carried his agitation. The rhythm would be slightly off. The strikes would be either too hard or too soft. He was going through the motions, but not truly present for the practice. One morning, after a particularly troubled night of sleep, Oshin arrived at the bell tower feeling heavy with all these concerns. He lifted the mallet and was about to strike the first note when he stopped. He realized he was about to ring the bell while completely lost in his mental suffering. The bell deserved better. The community deserved better. He deserved better. He set down the mallet and stood quietly in the dark tower, just breathing. After a few moments, he noticed a thought arising. This breath right now is a new breath. This moment is genuinely fresh. What happened in the night, what I was worrying about, all of that is past. Right now, I can choose to be here with the bell. It was such a simple recognition, but it shifted something. Oshin picked up the mallet again and struck the first note with full presence. The sound was clear and pure. He listened to it fade completely before striking again. For those few minutes of the bell sequence, he was not consumed by worry or resentment. He was simply there with the bell, beginning again. After finishing the sequence, Oshin walked to the meditation hall and sat for morning practice. Within minutes, the worried thoughts returned. His mother's illness, his guilt and resentment. All of it came flooding back as if the clarity at the bell tower had never happened. At first, Oshin felt discouraged. The peace had been so brief. But then he remembered. Each moment is new. Each breath is a beginning. He had practiced letting go at the bell tower. Now he could practice it again here in the meditation hall. Not because he had failed to do it permanently at the bell tower, but because letting go is not a permanent achievement. It is something we return to again and again. So Oshin let go again, gently, without criticism. He acknowledged the worried thoughts. Yes, I am concerned about my mother. That is natural. And then he returned his attention to his breath, beginning again. Throughout that day, Oshin found himself practicing this same return dozens of times. The resentment and worry would arise. He would notice them. He would acknowledge them. And then he would gently begin again, coming back to whatever he was doing in that moment. Eating, walking, working in the garden. Each activity became an opportunity to practice letting go and starting fresh. Over the weeks and months that followed, this became Oshin's primary practice. Not achieving permanent peace or permanent forgiveness of his situation, but returning again and again to the present moment. Letting go again and again of the resentment and guilt that would naturally arise. Some mornings at the bell tower, he would arrive completely clear and present. Other mornings he would arrive caught in worry and have to consciously begin again before striking the first note. Both kinds of mornings were fine. Both were opportunities for practice. Gradually, Oshin noticed something shifting. The resentment and worry still arose, but they arose less frequently and left more quickly. Not because he had mastered some technique, but because he had stopped fighting with them. He had stopped demanding that they never return. He simply acknowledged them when they came and gently returned to the present, beginning again. Years later, after his mother had passed peacefully and Oshin had moved through his grief, he continued to use the bell ringing as a practice of beginning again. Now, it was not resentment about his mother's illness that would arise, but other concerns and worries that are part of being human. But the practice remained the same. Notice what is present. Acknowledge it. And then gently begin again, returning to this breath, this moment, this strike of the bell. When younger monks would come to him troubled that their meditation practice kept being interrupted by wandering thoughts or difficult emotions, Oshin would tell them about his years of beginning again at the bell tower. "You are not failing when thoughts return," he would say. "You are being given another opportunity to practice. The thoughts will keep coming. Emotions will keep arising. That is what minds and hearts do. Our practice is not to stop them permanently, but to notice them and begin again. Every single time we return to the present, we are succeeding at the practice." Take a gentle breath here and feel what this teaching offers. How much pressure we place on ourselves to get things right once and for all. How we criticize ourselves when old patterns return. But what if, like Oshin discovered, the returning itself is the practice? What if beginning again over and over is not a sign of failure, but the path itself? This teaching transforms how we work with forgiveness. We might forgive someone and then find ourselves angry at them again days later. This does not mean our forgiveness was false or insufficient. It means we are being given another opportunity to practice letting go. We forgive again and again, as many times as needed. We might work through our shame about a mistake and feel free only to have it resurface when something reminds us of it. This is not regression. This is another layer of the healing process revealing itself. We meet it with compassion and gently release it again, beginning fresh in this moment. The practice of beginning again removes the burden of having to achieve permanent results. We do not need to forgive perfectly or completely or forever. We just need to be willing to forgive again right now, in this moment, knowing we might need to do it again tomorrow. This willingness is enough. Let us explore another story that shows this teaching from a different angle, one that reveals how even the most experienced practitioners continue this practice throughout their lives. In a teaching temple known for its wise instructors, there was an elderly meditation master named Keiko who had been practicing for over 50 years. Students came from across the region to learn from her, drawn by her reputation for deep understanding and compassionate guidance. One day, a dedicated student named Naoko came to Keiko's room early in the morning, clearly distressed. Keiko invited her to sit and share what was troubling her. "Master," Naoko said, tears in her eyes, "I have been working with forgiveness practice as you taught me. For months I have been sitting with my resentment toward my sister, offering her loving kindness, trying to let go of the old hurt between us. Last week, I finally felt I had succeeded. I felt genuine peace about our relationship. I felt the resentment had dissolved. She paused, her voice breaking. But this morning, I woke up and the resentment was back, just as strong as ever. It was like all my practice meant nothing. I thought I had forgiven her, but clearly I have not. I must be doing something wrong. Keiko listened with gentle attention. When Naoko finished, the older woman was quiet for a moment, gazing out the window at the garden where the morning sun was touching the leaves. "Tell me," Keiko said finally, "do you see that stone water basin in the garden?" Naoko looked and nodded. It was a simple basin where birds came to drink, carved from dark stone that had been in the garden for many years. "Every evening," Keiko said, "the birds drink from that basin and the water level goes down. Every morning, I refill it with fresh water. Have you noticed this?" "Yes, Master," Naoko said, uncertain where this was leading. "Do you think I am failing at keeping the basin filled because I need to refill it every day? Should I be disappointed that the water does not remain at the same level permanently?" Naoko saw the teaching immediately. "No, of course not. The water is used and needs to be replenished. That is natural." "Exactly," Keiko said with a soft smile. "And your forgiveness practice is like this. You offer loving kindness and let go of resentment. The resentment goes down like water being used from the basin. Then conditions arise that bring the resentment back up. This is not failure. This is simply the nature of the mind and heart. They need to be tended regularly, not just once." She leaned forward slightly. "I have a confession to make," Keiko said. "Something I do not often share with students. Would you like to hear it?" Naoko nodded, curious. "There is someone from my past, someone who harmed me badly when I was young, before I became a nun. I forgave this person many years ago. I did deep practice with it. I felt genuine release. I thought I was done with that forgiveness work." Keiko's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "But even now, 50 years later, sometimes I wake up and feel the old resentment. Not often, perhaps once or twice a year. But it still arises. When it does, I do not panic or think I have lost my practice. I simply notice it, like seeing a familiar visitor at the door. I say to myself, 'Oh, here is this old feeling again.' And then I practice with it again, exactly as I did decades ago. I offer loving kindness. I let it go. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes longer, and then I go on with my day." Naoko looked shocked. "You mean even after 50 years of practice, old resentments still come back?" "Yes," Keiko said simply. "Not constantly. Not with the same force they once had. But yes, they still arise sometimes. This is what it means to be human. To have a nervous system that stores memories. To have a heart that was genuinely hurt and remembers that hurt." She gestured toward the garden again. "The question is not whether difficult feelings ever return. The question is what we do when they do return. Do we meet them with judgment and disappointment in ourselves? Or do we meet them with the understanding that this is part of the practice, part of being alive, and we simply begin again?" Keiko stood and walked to her small altar where she kept a candle and a few simple objects. Every morning I light this candle, she said. Every evening it burns down and goes out. Every morning I light it again. I do not consider this a failure of the candle or my candle lighting skills. I understand that this is what candles do. They burn and then need to be lit again. She turned back to Naoko. Your forgiveness practice is the same. You forgive and feel peace. Then conditions arise that stir up old feelings. So, you forgive again. This is not regression. This is the practice deepening. Each time you return to forgiveness, you are strengthening that capacity. You are training yourself to let go more easily, more naturally. Over the following months, Keiko taught Naoko a specific morning practice. Each day when she woke, Naoko would take a few moments to notice what feelings were present. If resentment toward her sister was there, she would acknowledge it gently. Good morning, old friend. I see you are here today. And then she would practice letting it go again, offering loving kindness, beginning fresh. Some mornings, the resentment was there. Other mornings, it was not. Naoko stopped judging either condition as good or bad. She simply worked with what was present. When the resentment arose, she had the opportunity to practice forgiveness again. When it did not arise, she could appreciate the peace and move forward with her day. Years later, Naoko noticed that the resentment toward her sister arose very rarely. When it did, it was faint and passed quickly. This was not because she had finally achieved permanent forgiveness after enough practice. It was because the repeated practice of letting go again and again had worn a smooth path in her mind and heart. The pattern of release had become more familiar than the pattern of clinging. But Naoko also knew, from Keiko's teaching, that even when the resentment rarely arose, it might still appear sometimes. Especially if conditions were right. If she was tired or stressed. If something reminded her strongly of the old hurt. This possibility did not frighten her anymore. She knew what to do. She would simply practice again, beginning fresh, as she had done hundreds of times before. When Naoko eventually became a teacher herself, she would often tell students about that morning conversation with Keiko, about learning that even the most advanced practitioners still sometimes encounter old resentments and difficult feelings. That mastery does not mean never experiencing these things. It means knowing how to work with them when they arise. Forgiveness is not a door we pass through once and then it closes behind us, she would tell them. It is more like a garden gate that swings open. We walk through it into peace, but the gate swings closed again sometimes. When it does, we do not stand on the other side feeling betrayed. We simply open the gate again and walk through, as many times as needed. That is the practice. Both Oshin and Keiko show us the same profound teaching. Forgiveness is not a permanent state we achieve, but a practice we return to. The returning is not failure. The returning is the path itself. This understanding brings such relief when we truly take it in. We have been so hard on ourselves for not maintaining perfect forgiveness, perfect peace, perfect freedom from old patterns. But the Buddha never taught that awakening means never having difficult thoughts or feelings arise. He taught that awakening means knowing how to work with them skillfully when they do arise. In the practice of beginning again, we are not trying to prevent old wounds from ever resurfacing. We are developing the capacity to meet them with gentleness when they do. We are training ourselves to let go more easily, to return to the present more naturally, to forgive more readily. Each time we practice, the path becomes smoother. Not because we are building a wall that keeps difficult feelings out, but because we are wearing a groove that makes the return to peace more familiar. Like ocean returning to the bell each morning, like Keiko lighting her candle each day, we practice beginning again until beginning again becomes natural. Take another slow breath and notice what is present right now. Are there old resentments here? Old guilt or shame? This is not a problem. This is an opportunity. You can begin again right now, in this moment. Not forever, not permanently, but just for now. Just this breath. The practice of beginning again is ultimately about befriending impermanence. Nothing lasts forever, including our peace and our pain. Forgiveness fades and needs to be renewed. Resentment returns and needs to be released again. This is not the failure of the practice. This is the practice itself. When we understand this, we stop placing so much pressure on our forgiveness work. We do not need it to solve everything permanently. We just need to be willing to practice again when needed. To open the gate again when it swings closed. To light the candle again when it goes out. To fill the basin again when it empties. This is how forgiveness becomes integrated into our lives. Not as a special achievement we attain and then maintain, but as a regular practice we return to, like brushing our teeth or eating meals. Sometimes needed more, sometimes less, but always available when we need it. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not a distant goal, but a present possibility. In every moment, we have the opportunity to begin again, to let go of what we are carrying, to forgive what needs forgiving, to return to the simplicity of this breath, this moment, this fresh start. You do not need to maintain the forgiveness you cultivated earlier in this journey. You do not need to worry that the peace you felt might fade. It might. And when it does, you will simply practice again. You will begin again. As many times as needed, for as long as needed, with as much gentleness as you can offer yourself. This is the practice the Buddha taught. Not achieving permanent perfection, but returning again and again to presence, to kindness, to letting go. Each return is complete in itself. Each beginning again is enough. As you rest tonight, know that tomorrow is genuinely fresh. Whatever old feelings arise, whatever old patterns show up, you will have the opportunity to work with them, to notice them without judgment, to let them go gently, to begin again as you have done before, as you will do again. This is not a burden. This is the gift of being alive in this moment. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Right now, in this breath, you can choose. You can pick up old resentments or set them down. You can replay old stories or let them rest. You can demand that yesterday's peace lasts forever, or you can appreciate that today offers its own opportunity for peace. The practice of beginning again is the practice of forgiveness itself. Not as a destination reached, but as a returning embraced. Not as a permanent achievement, but as a moment-by-moment choice. Not as proof of our mastery, but as evidence of our humanity. Ocean rings the bell each morning. Keiko lights the candle each day. The water basin is refilled regularly. And we too return to our practice of forgiveness again and again. This is not failure. This is life. This is the path. This is how we slowly, gently, persistently wear away the patterns that bind us and create space for the peace that has always been available just beneath the surface, waiting for us each time we are ready to begin again. We have traveled together through the Buddha's teachings on forgiveness. We have explored the second arrow of self-judgment that we can choose to put down. We have looked at how resentment toward others poisons our own peace. We have worked with deep regrets and the weight of shame. We have examined the stories we tell ourselves and discovered the practice of beginning again. Throughout this journey, one teaching has woven through all the others. Forgiveness is not something we force or achieve once and for all. It is something we practice gently, again and again, with patience for ourselves and our very human hearts. You do not need to have forgiven everything tonight. You do not need to feel completely free from old wounds or regrets. Forgiveness unfolds in its own time, layer by layer, as we are ready for it. What matters is not that you have arrived at some final destination, but that you have been willing to explore these teachings with an open heart. Tomorrow morning is genuinely fresh. Each breath is a new beginning. When old resentments arise, you will know how to work with them. When shame appears, you will remember that you are more than your mistakes. When the stories feel too heavy, you will recall that you can hold them more lightly. The Buddha taught that everyone has the capacity to change, to grow, to begin again. This includes you. Whatever you are carrying tonight, you do not have to carry it alone anymore. These teachings are here for you whenever you need them. For now, simply rest. Let your body settle completely. Let your mind drift where it needs to go. You have done enough. You are enough. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.